Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Elections to Excellence. Conversation with Politico and Axios co-founder Jim VandeHei, backed by popular demand to Cresset. And we're joined by Cresset President Susie Cranston, who will be having a conversation with Jim today. I'm Doug Regan. I'm a co-founder and co-chairman here at Cresset. Cresset is an award-winning, independent multifamily office with a special focus on private investment opportunities for our clients. We have over $50 billion in assets under management, and the founding vision of our firm was to reinvent the way people experience their wealth. One of the ways we're doing that is by what we're doing right here today. That's bringing in interesting, involved people who are influencing our country and hearing from them and having open conversations so we can expand our network and expand our access to ideas. And today we're joined by Jim VandeHei, who grew up in Wisconsin, and his high school guidance counselor gave him some very good advice. He said, "You are not cut out for college." So Jim went out to prove him wrong, and in his first year, he had a 1.4 GPA. Jim, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We're very, very proud.
Well done. Yes.
Until he found his passion, and so many of our people in our country are looking for passion. Jim's passions were journalism and politics. So Jim went on to an illustrious career as a reporter and a journalist. He went on to co-found Axios, where he currently serves as CEO, and co-founded Politico. Millions of people get their news from Axios. And we're going to talk today about what's going on in the political world. But Jim is also a best-selling author, and his book, Just the Good Stuff, No BS Secrets to Success. Jim will talk about how he's infused these ideas into his life and in his work, and how we can instill passion in the people we love. So we're going to have a lively conversation. Susie is also, by the way, a best-selling author. Her book, How Remarkable Women Lead. So we have two best-selling authors. We're going to have an interesting conversation. I invite everybody to hit the Q&A button at the bottom. Please ask any questions of Jim and or Susie, and then I will rejoin later and we'll have an open conversation about what we've talked about today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Susie, and we're looking forward to hearing from Susie and Jim.
Thank you so much, Doug, and welcome, Jim. It is such an honor to get to speak to you today, and in particular, given everything that's happening in our country, I think everybody's very much looking forward to getting your perspectives. Before we dive into the good stuff, I wanted to start by maybe talking a little bit about the presidential election, which is so front and center for many of us right now. And Jim, on one of the Axios podcast interviews, you said that this election is ultimately about two very different futures. And so from a high level, I was wondering, what do those two different futures look like? And maybe you could share some of your perspectives with us on that.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Love Cresset, love working with you all. So appreciate this. I mean, what's interesting is you definitely have two very different political parties, right? The Republicans and the Democrats. You have two candidates, or at least one on the Democratic side, which I'll get to, that we don't actually know a lot about her ideology. I think it's a real problem. I understand the political strategy behind it of just say, we're joy, we're the future, we're not Joe Biden, we're not Donald Trump. But there's a weakness in that I think a lot of people don't know. Are you the liberal that you were in the Senate? Are you the liberal you were when you ran as a candidate? Or are you now authentically a moderate? If so, how did you get there? Would you really govern that way? Obviously, but my guess is it's a world that looks a lot like Joe Biden's world, right? Whatever it means to be a Democrat today is certainly not a liberal Democrat or an AOC Democrat. It looks something like Joe Biden. Right? It probably means a continuation of the policy like you see in the Middle East or what you see in Ukraine. It would be carrying out a lot of government spending that's been put into the pipes, but not actually been spent on infrastructure, green technology, getting that stuff done. I do think you would see your taxes go up. You're going to have the expiration of the tax cuts next year. I think they've been very clear that at least for those people making over $400,000, there's going to be a substantial, potentially, tax increase. So I think that would be a big difference. And then there's parts of Obamacare that will come up at the end of next year, which obviously Democrats support, and it would continue, if not expand. The interesting thing with Trump is he's somehow hard, in some ways hard to pin down his precise ideology, right? He's like a force of nature. He's not an ideological warrior. He's not a small government robust foreign policy, low taxation kind of guy. That's just not how he thinks. I think we know there's certain things that he would do that people should probably take him at his word. I do think we probably would round up and expel a lot of people who are here illegally on day one. I think he might even use the military in ways where we've not seen other presidents use to accomplish a goal like that. You might love that, you might hate it, but that is certainly something that hasn't been done before, and certainly not at that scale. I think we have to take him at his word on tariffs. As nonsensical as some of the things he says are from an economic sort of theory standpoint, I think he does believe that the power of threatening tariffs does give the United States leverage in trying to get other countries to reduce their tariffs or trade with us on more equal footing. There's certainly a logic to that. But if you get into slapping 20, 30, 40% tariffs on products, ultimately it's inflationary. And there's no way you can actually avoid it in the short term, but we should assume he would do that. I think there's much better chance that you would retain the tax system as is and basically have an extension of the Bush tax cuts if he were elected. So very different governing like philosophy, certainly different governing styles. I think with Trump, you get even more volatility in that you don't really know what he's going to do. I don't know that he often knows what he's going to do. And I think some people love that, and it does give them this aura of unpredictability. Some people hate it because it scares the hell out of them, and they worry, are you going to have another January 6th? Are you going to do something impulsive? Are you going to play footsie with Putin in a way that weakens our standing with our European allies? There's a lot of legitimate concerns about that, but the idea, I still, even in the campaign, I still see some people like, oh my God, Trump's going to change, or if he governs, he'll be different. I'll tell you like one person who never changes. There's like three people who never change, right? It's rich people, old people, and people with their names on buildings. Imagine that you have all three of them. Their capacity to change is zero. So what he is, he shall be until he dies. And you should assume that that's how he would govern.
Well, and it's, so interesting because given some of these, questions that people still have on Kamala, and then, everything you said about Trump, the debate, obviously, through 67 million people on September 10th. I know after that debate, I believe you and your colleague, Mike Allen, wrote that Trump blew it badly and repeatedly and predictably because he just can't help himself. And so I was curious, what are you hearing from inside the Trump campaign related to his performance at that debate and generally? And then maybe, what does that translate into this evening's debate on CBS between the vice presidential candidates? And, would love to hear your thoughts on both those.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you need to understand about Trump is he's just not like a traditional candidate in that, yes, he has a staff and yes, he has advisors, then he does what he wants to do. So do his advisors wish he'd stop talking about 2020? Yes. Do they wish he would stop making misogynistic or racist comments? Yep. Do they wish that he would have prepared for that debate and had like a very compelling argument to make against Vice President Harris? He did not make it in that debate. And so, yes, they wish that he would change. I mean, when I think about the capacity to change in almost cinematic terms, like just think about this. So go back to the Republican National Convention, which seems like 1,000 years ago. It's like a month ago, right? After he is shot at, go back to the date, go back to that second the bullet hits his ear. He's standing there on stage. He knows, like, he hears a gunshot and feels something. 99.9999% of people on Earth today would duck and cover and worry that there's another gunman going. Somehow, he thinks to jump up with his ear bloodied, 3 American flags somehow perfectly positioned behind him, raises his arm, and creates maybe the most iconic photo of our lifetimes. Like, we don't see it now, but you're going to look back at that. Here is a candidate almost assassinated within inches, and somehow the patriotic flags flying in the background, hand held high. He kind of looks like a hero. And he knows at that point, he goes back and his staff is like, you won. Just put a sock in it. Don't say anything. Don't talk the next 2 months. Just say, I love America. I'm a new man. I have seen the light. I'm going to unite the country, and you win by 20 points. He knows that, knows it, tells people that, gets to the convention speech, and for 28 minutes, he does just that. The first 28 minutes, all about this, I'm changed. He's a little meandering and weird about it, but like he does it. And then the next 50 minutes, he's old Trump and undoes everything that he knew had he just protected that he would have won. So he's not going to change. His staff doesn't try to change him. There's in terms of the vice presidential debate tonight, to be honest, it's probably fun to watch. It's probably meaningless in terms of the campaign. I don't know any person who votes based on the vice presidential candidate, especially when you have Trump at the top of the ticket and Vice President Harris. People just have very strong reactions to both of them. And so do I think both will probably be a little bit better at delivering their message than their bosses? Maybe, though I think Harris, when the vice president is choreographed, which she was for that debate, she's pretty good at delivering her message. JD Vance is like a smarter version of Trump in terms of articulation of, if there is a populist theology, he can articulate it and he can put a little more academia behind it. So it'll probably be interesting. And I don't even know if it's like sometimes these things are like, oh, a taste of the future. I don't know for either. It's not like if Democrats lose, the future's walls, like he's going to disappear. And I don't know if Trump were to lose that there's enough enthusiasm around JD Vance. I think there's a better chance that Don Jr. or Tucker will carry that, Tucker Carlson would carry that forward more than it would be him.
Yeah. Well, so, going back to the vice presidential debate may not be that consequential. I mean, obviously what the press and everybody spends a lot of time talking about are these undecided voters, right? And, it's interesting because even after the presidential debate, most of the media outlets said that the debate didn't, move that needle at all. Yeah. And I'm curious, why do you think so many people are still on the fence?
One, I don't know that there's that many undecided. Like, here's the problem with coverage, and here's the problem with us getting antsy about trying to figure out who's going to win. Nobody had a clue 18 months ago, 12 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 3 hours ago, or will until election day. The reason is that you live in a 50-50 country where most of our elections are decided by tens or hundreds of thousands of votes. In most elections, like this election, really people who live in 43 states are irrelevant. We know exactly what you're going to do and who's going to be the winner of your electoral vote. So you don't even matter. So then you get down to 6 or 7 states. In this case, there's 7 states, and they're probably common to everybody. Even within those 7 states, you're only looking at about 7% of the population within those 7 states that is actually persuadable in any shape or form. So then in each side of those states, you'd have to go one by one. In some states, it's Hispanic men, and some it's suburban moms who kind of like Trump's policies and hate the man. And we can go down the list. And so there's so much unpredictability in this campaign for the House, the Senate, and the White House. And in those 7 states, then you layer on top of that there's a couple things stirring out there that I don't know anybody can make a lot of sense of. Like, you do know now that rich white people are moving towards the Democratic Party and away from the Republican Party. But you do have a lot of people who are working class moving towards Trump. And it started in the last election, or even before the last election, and in some ways has sped up, particularly among Black men and Hispanics, but Hispanic men in particular. And there happen to be a lot of Hispanic men in a couple of the swing states. So we don't really know what's going to happen there. Layer on top of that, there's this interesting dynamic with young people who don't vote in big numbers, but some number of them will. And you're seeing a huge divergence, an historic divergence between young men and young women. Young women are becoming increasingly liberal and increasingly vocal about their liberalism. Young men are becoming increasingly conservative and increasingly vocal about their conservatism. They're living in different information ecosystems. They're very hard. Virtually both campaigns would say they're almost impossible to find because they might be on Telegraph or Rumble or YouTube channel. Very hard to find and try to figure out what they think and whether they'll vote and can they be persuaded to vote. And so I look at that and I mix it all up into a stew and I say nobody's going to know the outcome of the House, the Senate, or the White House, maybe even on election night, but certainly not till election night. And that is kind of what we've had for a long time. Like, people forget, if you go to the last election, go to the 2022 House off-year elections. If you moved 11,155 votes in 5 districts total, so 11,000 people, Republicans would have won. Republicans would have lost the House. So that it's just that tight. So we think of this massive country, 330 million people. the fact is, like, it's basically less than 1 million people who are dictating control of our government.
Wild. And so, one of the questions I actually wanted to ask you, but maybe it's irrelevant, is, do you think that there are a top, 3 issues that will decide the election? Because from what you're saying, it sounds like we're getting so granular and so sort of targeted into these micro populations that, maybe there aren't, maybe we don't live in a day where there's, really the top 3 issues, because it is so specific. But I'm curious.
I think that's probably the right way to think about it. I think if you want to look at it from a macro perspective, you'd say, yes, the top issues are immigration and abortion. Immigration, because it speaks to safety and masculinity. And I think Trump really benefits from both. If you think about it, there's, in some ways, this is the most masculine versus feminine campaign we've had. Like, you had a lot of that in 2020 and some of it in 2016, but it's very much kind of a boys versus girls election. And so you see very much like the crime and immigration and transgender, like scare you, like I'll protect you. That's like the Trump thing. On the other side, it's abortion, because you've seen Democrats in recent elections, off-year elections, even state elections, benefiting tremendously from a perceptible increase in the number of women voting for them, and that tips elections. And one of the interesting things about our country is that women are much better voters than men have been. 14 out of the last 15 elections, you've had more women voting than men, and women vote by a decent margin traditionally for Democrats. And so it's one of the truisms of politics. And when I think about politics, I always try to drill it down to, like, what are the known knowns, right? What are the things that aren't just like nonsense that you see through your social media feed, and like the known knowns, and like that is a known known, right? And we know the known known is there's very few swing states, and a known known is that, that you should expect volatility. That if you go back to 2000 through now, I think we've only had 1 election cycle where you haven't had a change of the House, the Senate, or the presidency. That's a lot of volatility. You go back, I remember I think it was from 1948 till 84, maybe even 94, Democrats had controlled the House. So like 40 years. And a lot of that time controlled the Senate, and a decent chunk of that controlled the presidency. So just like you had almost a static nature in governance, where now it's like everything. It's like business, it's markets, it's your investment portfolio. There's volatility everywhere you look.
No, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I'm sure you get asked about a lot, but is certainly for the layman like myself, and I'm sure many of these calls, is something we're struggling to understand, which is polling. And, obviously, the latest national polls, I think, give a slight edge to Harris, but, we all remember 2016, and the polls got it completely wrong. And so, for those of us that, don't live and breathe this the way you do, how do we think about polling today? Is it more accurate? I mean, should we just kind of ignore it? I'm curious how you look at that data.
There's mixed signals on the efficacy of polling, right? So a couple things to apply. A national poll, for the reasons I just talked about, irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Somebody could be up by 30 points if you're not going to win in the states that require to get you to an electoral college majority. It's irrelevant, right? So national polls pretty much irrelevant. In the states, listen, like the polls have been, to me, they have almost all said the exact same thing now for a year, that it's within the margin of error in those 7 states. So even if it moves 1 or 2 points, remember your margin of error on polling, if you just think about basic statistics, you're looking at a 3 to 5% margin of error. So it's safe to say that all 7 of those are a coin toss. It's like fun to like play with it and see what things are moving, but I don't find them to be terribly helpful, even though like we cover them, other people cover them. I don't know that they're any less useful. I mean, if they undercount Republicans, and there has been in the last presidential election, but not the last off-year election, it looks like polls missed Republican vote by about 1.2 points or something like that. I think part of it is like, if you're a Republican, and I'm just really generalizing here, and you get a phone call from a pollster, you probably assume they're a communist or the part of the media. So you might either not answer, or you might mess with them. And I think there's probably some static and noise that you get in your polling as a result of that. And it's just harder to reach people, right? You don't have a landline. It used to be a little bit easier, and
no one picks up on no calls anymore. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So.
And so I guess before we switch topics a little bit, so is it really, as you watch results come in, you're going to be watching those 7 states, right? That's anything else you would say about what we should be, as we get towards election night, how we should be thinking about, watching those results come in?
Pennsylvania. Just pay attention to Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania only. I could probably tell you who's going to win the House, the Senate, and the White House. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, he probably wins the presidency. If McCormick, who's a Republican candidate, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, wins that Senate race, you're probably going to have a pretty big Republican majority and a big Republican night. And so I think that's the easiest way to watch it and to think about it. And also, just don't be surprised if you don't know that night. You're going to have a lot of rural counties. It takes a lot of time to count. You've got a lot of noise right now from both sides about is there going to be manipulation of the vote, and could there be violence afterwards? And listen, I think do I think there will be? I don't, but I think that there's a much higher percentage chance than I would have pre-2020. I do, and we should just be aware of that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is helpful, and I'll be paying particular attention to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So let's pivot to your new book called Just the Good Stuff, No BS Secrets to Success, No Matter What Life Throws at You, which I love because life does often throw us curveballs, as we all know. And so what I was hoping is for the people on this call that maybe aren't familiar, could you use the smart brevity version of your journey from, I don't want to say lackluster student, but maybe less motivated student to media entrepreneur, and maybe, why your story should give hope for us all.
Yeah, I mean, had you met me when I was 19 or 20, I'm smoking a pack of half a cigarettes a day. I'm delivering pizzas. I'm really good at drinking. I'm really fun. Love playing. I love gambling. But there's nothing you'd say like, he's going to 8 years from now, he's going to be interviewing a president, or he's going to start a couple of media companies. Nothing. There's nobody should have thought it. That guidance counselor was spot on in their appraisal of me at that point in time. And my journey was like, I fell in love with journalism. I always had a lot of interest in politics. I moved out to DC. I became a political reporter in my young 20s. Caught a couple of breaks, broke some stories. In my late 20s, I'm covering the presidency for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Did that for several years, and then had the idea to create this company called Politico. We pulled that together. It took off, and it was a real public success, and behind the scenes, it was an absolute show. I had to basically teach myself to go from never managing anything other than the night shift at Little Caesars back there in my glory days to now running a company. So I was a self-taught CEO, and was bad at the beginning. I think I got good over time, hopefully. Then started Axios 10 years later, and now I'm here. And the reason I wrote the book, I'm not like a lot of journalists are like, I've got to write a book, or like my intellectual credibility will never truly be established. I didn't care. I never thought I'd write a book, but I wrote it because I've been writing a column and just like kind of making fun of myself to talk about like, how do you build a company by learning from all the mistakes that I made early on. And it just seemed to resonate. And so I pulled it together into a book, and it's aimed at anyone who's in leadership or management, but also aimed at people who came maybe from more like my background, not from a background of privilege, or, might not have been like the obvious person to go to have some success, hoping to like inspire people that doesn't really matter where you're from. If you kind of follow a couple of these things, follow your passion, work hard, blah, 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 you can do some pretty cool things in this country. So it's been fun, and it's fun that it's all stuff that we've put into practice, right? Like you wrote a book, right? And I'm sure it flows from you happen to be a remarkable woman in leadership. So like, what does that mean? And there's something very neat about like authentic mentorship, right? Like when you have something that you've gone through, and you can like pass on the learnings of that to somebody else, and they actually apply it. Like I would say that's where I probably get my most joy is like people who've left here. Like there's most of the new media companies that have been started other than ours have been started by people we trained, and they use a lot of the principles that and I don't say that to boast. I love that. I love that like somebody who probably wouldn't have been an entrepreneur was sparked to become an entrepreneur, and now they're creating wealth for themselves and others. And that's the beauty of capitalism. And so, like, what brought you to write your book? Like, so there had to be a moment.
It's funny. I was going to thank you for writing yours because, I will say when I wrote my book, I was a young associate at McKinsey at the time. And And, but I think back on those interviews I did with women leaders all over the world, and I use those lessons all the time today. So I think, I was able to get where I'm sitting because somebody like you took the time to share what they had learned along the way, which I think is, really fantastic and a gift back to, the whole community. One of the phrases that you talked about in your book that really stayed with me, at least, was, all you can do is the next right thing. And I think, one of the things about leadership is that there's oftentimes many, gray areas, and you don't exactly know, maybe what the best thing is. And so having, a guiding principle like that, I think has been, something that I've thought about a lot. And so I was curious, how have you thought about that, concept to help you navigate some of the challenging times, in your life? And obviously, headline making departure from Politico, starting, another fantastic media company. You've definitely had, all sorts of different situations to apply something like this to.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the principle that's guided my life more than anything. And it came from, and I say it in the book, we left Politico, when we had started it, we didn't start it with venture. We basically were backed by a rich guy, and over time, and it was a good run. And he and I had different values, and we clashed a lot. It was in DC, a pretty public clashing. And there's times where you just want to, you want to fight. And I was sitting there at church, and the preacher was giving this sermon, and he was talking about how his kids were like, "Oh man, like life is so big. Like, how do I behave?" And he made the point. He said, "Man, don't think of life that big. Just think of like the next thing that stares you in the face. Like, do the right thing. And if you make it that small, it's easy to do the next right thing, as opposed to how am I never going to tell a lie, or how am I never going to do anything that is immoral." And I found that really helpful, and I used it with my team when they wanted to maybe not make the best decision, to say, do the next right thing. And to me, like one of the things that can piss me off is like when I watch people in positions of power not take, like, it's not a burden of leadership. It's like this amazing freaking gift that like you get to be in a position where other people are going to do things based on the decisions that you make. And I wish people took that a little more seriously. I think so deeply about it. I think about people watching me. I know how contagious everything that I do is. And I think some leaders forget that. Like if you show me any organization that has good characteristics or bad characteristics, I will trace them instantaneously directly to the person in charge. And if you think about morality and values, wherever it flows from, if you set that and you live it and people see it, especially in difficult moments, it is magical how it can take root. And I've seen it. Like we have, like one of the things we do here is I said, listen, one of the things I wanted to fix for that we didn't get right at Politico that I want to get right here is like early on, I fired probably 6, 7, 8 people who were super high performers who just weren't nice. They just weren't, and not nice in that like everyone has to hug each other, but they had these cancerous attributes, and that stuff spreads. And so by me doing that and people seeing that we live by it, at 525 people, like I think you go, oh my God, like these people are really ambitious, but oh my God, it seems like a cult in that they're so kind to each other. Not kind seems like we have a tendency, especially when you're making money and you're running businesses, you think of kind as like being soft and weak. I don't mean it that way. Like there's nothing soft or weak I would think about like my leadership style or this company, but there is something about like this idea of like, can you surround yourself with what I always called killers with humility, like killer talent, killer ambition, but the humility to like think about the cause, the company, the team above themselves. And I think when you do that as a leader, magical things happen. And I worry a lot because I look around and I see people just losing faith in all institutions and all leaderships, government. They don't trust media. They don't go to church. They don't belong to unions, whatever. The things that held us together when I was younger, they're all gone, right? And so the only thing that's really left, if you look at these studies on trust, is local businesses in your employer. That is like the last bastion of trust between individual and societal like leadership. And so to me, running businesses, like then well, we have an even bigger obligation to provide that. It doesn't mean we have to coddle people or weigh in on political topics or do some of the stupid things that I watched companies do over the last 5 years, overreacting to their insecurities about their probably poor performance and topics they should have been better on initially. like, it doesn't mean you have to do those things, but it does mean like, pretty cool that young people want to have purpose. So give them some purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's good that
Yeah.
people want to be proud of the place that they work with. Give them something to be proud of.
Yeah. It's so interesting because that expression, leaders bring their own weather. I mean, it's been proved through research to be true, right? That, what the way that a leader is feeling, that is contagious in an organization the way COVID is contagious, right? And so that resonates. And, it's interesting, one of the things that, I love about Cresset is that, it is a very values-based organization. And another, research piece from my days at McKinsey is we found that companies that have strong values and cultures actually do perform better over time, probably for the reasons you're talking about, right? People get
Oh, for
meaning
sure.
out of it, and then it makes people happier, and that unlocks a whole host of elements. I am curious, as you were talking, was this desire to sort of maintain a company that has this kind of culture part of why, when you had the chance to maybe bring Axios and your former company Politico together with the goal of putting you at the helm of both. In many ways, it seems like that might have been an ideal situation. Did that factor into why you ultimately turned that down?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. So, like, for people on the call, so I had left Politico, we started Axios, then there was a company that wanted to kind of buy both, and they, we met up at Sun Valley, and they're like, "Oh, you can come in." I think they thought they were giving me a gift. They're like, "Listen, we'll do both, and then you can run both." And I was like, I had this look on my face like they had handed me a dirty diaper. I'm like, I don't want. I already left that. I don't want to go do that. And like, now it's 1,000 people, and it's someone else's culture, and like, I like what we have, and like, the idea of spending my days retrofitting a culture I didn't build just to me felt like a drag, right? Like, I like the idea of like, this place is a reflection of us. And, even when we've not done big acquisitions, we're about to do a couple, but even those, like, a lot of my time and due diligence, once I get beyond the business strategy, is like, could these people fit into this culture? Because like, I don't want, and not to over index on culture, but I do think it's really, really important because like, especially when you think about retention of employees in this virtual world, like, the culture is what keeps people from leaving when Google calls and offers a 20% premium. Like, I need that, right? You need that that magic to keep people there. So it was a very good decision. It ended up working out for us from a financial perspective even better too. But fundamentally, it was about like, I like what we have, and I don't want to build from that. And a hack on, going back to your thing about the doing the next right thing. Like, one hack that might be helpful that's worked for me is like, I've learned to like icky situations, right? So like, or like, huh, like when you're a CEO or you're running something, like, by the time something gets to you, you're like, oh my God, like, someone did what? And one of the things that I try to do is I envision myself in that moment, kind of watching myself, like, try to have almost an out of body experience. Like, how are other people seeing me? Am I overreacting? Am I losing my cool? Do I seem confident in kind of the course correction that we're going to take? Am I articulating it? Am I pointing fingers, or am I pointing the finger at myself? Right? Like, once you do that and you give yourself almost the humility and the license to self-appraise ruthlessly, it makes you better in those situations. And not that I wouldn't wish them upon me, but
Yeah.
I like it because I'm like, oh wow, this is going to give me like some new insight to myself or business or humanity, as opposed to like, oh my God, like, so and so did what, we're going to get sued. Right? So it's probably a healthier mentality.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? It's pushing you outside your comfort zone, right? And what's outside your
Yeah.
comfort zone is your learning zone, right? And I think a little bit of what you're saying, it sounds like, is as you get pushed outside that comfort zone, there are other opportunities besides discomfort to lean into, right? So one of the things I think that you also have a lot of expertise around is sort of how the workplace is evolving, which is interesting when you think about how you're building your culture and your company to meet that need. And I think one of the things that you wrote is that most C-suite executives are set up for an era that died years ago, which made me laugh when I read that quote. So what do you think leaders need to understand about the new reality of work and the new generations that we're working with?
Yeah, I think the big one is like, there is a tendency to kind of roll our eyes at younger workers, right? Oh my God, they're so entitled. They all think they should be CEO. Oh, they want this mushy purpose. I would look at it differently because like again, like it goes back to like we don't once you're in leadership, you don't have the luxury to romanticize about the workplace you wish you had. Like you have what you have. And what you have is you do have younger workers, say under the age of 35, who are hell-bent on finding deeper meaning from their work. I have become a massive convert to their way of thinking. I think they're right, we were wrong. I look back and I'm like, man, when I got a job, I just wanted a paycheck and I didn't want someone to punch me. That's it. If I got that, like I'm golden. But now I think about it, I'm like, well, wait a second. I'm 80% of my life, probably now 100%, is work, right? I'm going to work, I'm at work, leaving work, right? Like, why wouldn't you want it to be something more than a paycheck if you have that opportunity? So I love that. And what it means is it's not that there's not still financial motivation, because there is, but it means I think as leaders, it is incumbent upon us to really figure out like what is it that is special about the company you're running? What is it that you do? Is there something in the community you're doing? Is there a product you're creating that's making lives better? Are you so generous with your benefit package and how you treat your employees that you're allowing them to live a better life and to be a better partner, a better member of a family? And be able to talk about that over and over and over and over again. Like for us, because we're a media company, it's about, hey, we get people smarter, faster on what matters. And if that happens, they make better decisions and we all benefit. So but I say it so often that it probably drives people nuts. And as leaders, we tend to be so practical that we're like, oh, I already said that. No, like until you've annoyed the hell out of yourself, only then have people started to pay attention to you. And then until you're almost numb from saying it so much, is it starting to stick. And like you just have to know that. And I think that to me is the big change. And then again, I laugh sometimes at like at these companies that have gotten so like constipated and over like work from anywhere, right? Like of course we all want everyone to work in the office if you could. But you got to be practical about it. There's just certain pockets of talent that made the decision to move to Boise instead of DC. And so you just have to be practical. Then you say, okay, well, if you can't have everybody in the office, then what do you lose? You lose creativity, you lose human connectivity, which could lead to higher attrition rates. Okay, then what do you do? Like, are there ways around that? Are there more retreats, regional retreats? Like, what are the ways that you can still get what you want out of an office atmosphere in a dispersed work world? And so just like being practical about what you have. And I think if you do those things, like I have not found that young people won't work as hard as we did. I think they do. And I think the really smart ones and the clever ones probably come into the workforce better equipped than we did, mainly because they're so fluent in a lot of the technologies that are dominant in so many departments that we run, that there's advantages. But you said figure that out, then figure out where is that true. Right. Like one other lesson that might help you is, and people don't love this, but like, I won't really hire people out of college anymore because we had these young people who were the malcontents and wanted all these things that we didn't offer. Whereas people who'd been at other places are like, oh my God, this is nirvana. And so, okay, then we self-corrected there. And we said, okay, it's going to be almost impossible for somebody who's not worked at a couple of places to come work here because we're going to end up with more issues and we're going to end up with benefits. So like constant calibration.
That's super interesting. Well, listen, I have about 50 more questions that we didn't get to, but we also have had a hugely active Q&A coming in. So Jim, I think one last thing that might be interesting for the audience to hear a bit about is, you've looked a lot at AI and, how AI and the media, come together. And I think one quote we have is, AI will eviscerate the weak, the ordinary, and unprepared in media. And so how are you thinking about Axios' strategy in light of the coming AI revolution? And how are you thinking about, what AI is going to do to the media industry in general?
Yeah, I'm sure there's nobody on the call who's not thinking about it and probably investing quite aggressively in different manifestations of either AI, the data, or the electricity it'll take to create it. The way that I think about it is I find it inconceivable that the smartest companies in the history of humanity, some of which operate at a scale of a nation state, have collectively made the decision to spend ultimately trillions of dollars to will into existence a much better version of the generative AI that you see today. So the practical person in me says, you know what? It's a little janky right now. I see moments where blows my mind great. I had a lot of those this weekend, and I see others where it's a little bit scary that it doesn't reach human efficacy yet. I believe it will. I'm operating from the assumption that is it going to be nirvana? Is it going to be so powerful it takes over the earth? I will push that one out. And I try to look at it practically and say, listen, it's going to do a lot of the things that humans do right now way better that we probably don't want to do. And we'd much rather pay a machine to do it than pay humans to do it, and have humans do other things that require nuance and creativity and other things that might be unique to our species. And so I think constantly about that, right? I think about, okay, at what point can it be our copy editor? What point can it do our data visualization, our visualization, help with sales leads, help process sales leads, help a local businessman place an ad on one of our local sites? I think about that a lot. And so I think about it from how can we run the company more efficiently? And I think it will, at least for our company, I'm optimistic it's going to be a net benefit, potentially a very big net benefit. I look at it as a reporting thing. I probably spend as much time talking to Sam Altman as I would Trump or Trump staff, in that I just think that that's the future, and I want to understand their worldview. I want to understand the skeptics' worldview. I'm going to spend all next week, again, going deeper on all the different parts of the chain, on data, on energy, on this, just so I fully understand kind of where things stand. And then I think about it in terms of what's going to happen with news. And that's where I think the change will be very, very profound. I believe with a high degree of confidence that there will be a new platform where we are interacting with that we're going to get the vast majority of our information from. I don't know what, and they don't know. Is that platform going to be glasses like Zuckerberg would say in 2030? Is it going to be just a better version of your phone that Apple might say? Or might it be like Elon Musk saying you might have a chip in your brain where you're just a direct interface? I don't know. I don't know what it is. But I think I have a good idea or a good theory about what it's going to look like. And I think we see it already in some of the applications that are good, such as taking notes on meetings like this. I think we're all going to have a personal LLM that's going to know more. At first, it's going to know as much about us as anything has ever known about us. And then it's going to know more about us because it's going to know our tendencies and our habits. And it's going to do everything from, it's going to be your booker for flights. It's going to be your fashion consultant and your fashion buyer. It's going to be your personal assistant sending out messages. It's in all likelihood going to know exactly how you like your information. Do you want it in bullet points and written? Do you want it sung to you by Taylor Swift? Whatever you want, it's going to give it to you. And those things will all come and unite in one. What that means for media is that for a lot of people who just need general news and information or things that they're searching out, it's probably going to be displaced. And so anything that is general, that is not distinctive, I work from the assumption that it will die and the machines will eat it. And like, I've made peace with that. And therefore, at least for our company, I'm like, okay, well, what will thrive? What will thrive is really distinctive content for very specific groups of people. So for us, it's policy professionals, people in C-suites, technology leaders, people who are in communities in non-hyper-competitive local news environments. And so if we can deliver the goods there, and in each one of those, it requires nuance, analysis, and interpretation. I don't think AI is going to be good enough to do that for the professional class. I think it's going to be table stakes for everyone. We're all going to have basically equal access to knowledge in a way that we don't now. But I don't think it's going to, the next level of things that require me to have a conversation with you to glean the nuance of your facial expression and where this actual conversation might go. And so I think that's what will have a ton of value.
All right, Doug, as I said, we've had a lot of questions coming in. So
we do. Thank you. It was a really interesting conversation. And Jim, on behalf of beer drinking, cigarette smoking, fist fighting, pizza jocks all over the country, you're a beacon.
I'm their man.
You're the man. We have a ton of questions coming in, and I want to start with what you just ended up on, basically, and it really regards Axios. And you talk about smarter, faster, and what matters. Question came in regarding our fragmented media ecosystem, information tunnels, echo chambers. We curate the news we want to hear. So Would you talk about how your philosophy has evolved over time, what you want Axios to be in that ecosystem? And then they ended up with, do you think the fairness doctrine ever comes back?
I think like for us, we're not that different than when we launched 7 years ago. We launched, we're not that old, but the idea is, how do you help really smart, busy people get smarter faster, right? So we think a lot about the efficiency in how we convey information. And we put a lot of our investment in people who are just smarter than other people in the spaces that we care about, so that they could tell somebody who has a certain level of sophistication things that they don't know, or offer them context that they might not come up with on their own. And so yes, we have like a bigger evolution of that, but essentially that core stays the same. The fragmentation part that you talked about, that your questioner had, is a smart one. Like, that is like the single biggest change. So like, I bet you everyone on this call, if you do this thought experiment, do you feel slightly more anxious today than you did 6 months ago, just generally? And do you find yourself today versus 6 months ago more frequently wondering if something you just saw is real, something you just read is real? Or
You know the answer to that, don't you?
everyone, it doesn't matter, young, old. I'm doing this like the last couple of months, and like everyone. So why is that? Well, the reason is like, we don't have this sort of common window that we're all looking through anymore. We're not all watching the same news source, following the same people, interested in the same topics. And what's happened is that window is shattered into 25, 50 pieces. Like, we wrote a column on this, and I'm still trying to dig deeper to figure out what are all those different information ecosystems. But you could think about kids on TikTok, or predominantly women on Instagram, or older people on Facebook, or professionals reading the Wall Street Journal, whatever it is. Each one of those ecosystems is so different from the other. Not just in the way that you're using it, you're scrolling versus maybe reading a paper or reading a site. It is the topics that they follow are so different from one platform to the other. So my kids could be completely hopped up about some kind of controversy that might never even come across my desk. And I consume a lot of news, never heard about it. But it's really big on TikTok, really big on Instagram, really big on Snap. And they might be following somebody and really take it to the bank, like they're Walter Cronkite, that I've never heard of. Never known.
Is this Terra Nova for us, or can you think of a historical precedent where people were able to curate news this way?
There just isn't. I don't think there is a historical precedent. I think, like, if you go back a couple hundred years, you certainly had a lot of people getting news in their city or their village or whatever from different sources, but you didn't have the common connectivity, where now a person in village in Wisconsin could be communicating and interacting with content with somebody in Vietnam, right? And instantaneously for free. Like, so that fragmentation is at the heart of like a complete rewiring and rethinking of information conveying and information consumption. And it's huge, because like, most companies don't understand this. They still communicate like it's 1990. Or I still see people send out press releases, like things that like make no sense, none at all, in terms of how you would communicate in a modern era. So if you're a communicator or you're a company, you better figure out if you can find some communicators who understand behaviorally and demographically what's happening in these different platforms, and how can they help or hurt me, and how do I or should I interact with any of them, all of them, some of them. And in that,
your point around, there's 700 people in these 7 states that are, each interacting with those media sources in such different ways, right? That's part of the challenge there too.
Right. That's right. Here's a question for both of you, and I'm going to give a shout out to obviously a big fan, Willard. You've asked about 15 great questions. This one is going to apply to Jim and to Susie. And Jim, you touched on this earlier around work from home or work from anywhere. So the question really is, where do you both stand on this issue? And is what's happening now going to be our new normal going forward? Will people work in Boise for the rest of our careers? Or do you think that we'll see a return to the traditional office protocol? And I'd love to hear from both.
In my view, is that you just look at the numbers, right? I think you have more companies that are trying to pull their employees back in at least more days. My belief is it's never going to be what it used to be. You're still going to have some companies like ours that are going to be forever remote. We were remote before COVID, we're remote now. We have we have 30 Axioses in 30 different cities. Like I need people on the ground there. I don't have an ability to, I don't want to pay for a building for each and every one of those people. The reason I can have people in these cities is I don't have the cost of a building and I don't have the cost of a printing press. And so we don't want it. And so I think there's a lot of companies that are going to want to be able to draw from talent that move to Austin, that move to Boise, that move to Topeka.
So this is just being practical, right?
Just being practical.
Yeah.
And like, again, like it depends on your company and all that, but like just it is what it is. Like we have a population problem, which is always, I think, for the most part, is probably going to continue to give more leverage to the workers than workers used to have. And particularly technologists. There's a finite number of people who can use technology at a sophisticated level, and they are in hot demand by these big companies. So for the rest of us who want to pick through and get some of them, you have to offer something unique. And it might be that what you unique is like, well, you want to live in Salt Lake City, that's fine. Just as long as you do your job. We have ways of measuring it.
Yep. Susie, you work in a collaborative business.
I do. It's interesting. I obviously your experience colors so much of your beliefs, and I am older, but in my experience, when you're supporting clients and you're in a client service industry, which obviously we are at Cresset and I have been my whole career, I do think that it is important that the people who are supporting the clients are together fairly regularly to make sure that there's no miscommunication, that everybody's working in sync. And I also think, for client-centric organizations to be able to see the clients and interact with them on a regular basis is important. So, Cresset is 3 days a week in office. And, I think, Jim, your comments though on, how do you get the best cyber talent, or where do you, what do you have to do to get the right people in the room, are things we think about a lot. And, if I had to make my own prediction on where all of this ends, as Jim said, we're not going to go back to what we had before. And, as a working mom, some of the flexibility that, is now possible for working parents or people taking care of elderly or, whatever you have going on in your life, I think is a fantastic development. But I do think it probably, will end up being a little bit industry specific and role specific, even within an industry, about what that work from home versus work in person looks like. Obviously, if you're in retail or, in industries where your employee base has to come in every day, that's, a very different set of options than, if you're doing something that lends itself to remote work more easily.
Right. So it's being flexible and being practical. So, Jim, you talked earlier about culture and you wanted to curate a very specific culture. Our friend Steve has a question here, and he said, would you give your thoughts around what you've experienced as the #1 culture killer in your companies, and what do you do to avoid it?
Number one would be, I think there's two actually. One, if foggy thinking is like the big, like if you don't have like a sense of purpose, I think one of the things we've gotten right is we have a real like strong clarity of purpose. We know exactly what we're trying to do and how everything fits into that. So I think like that is really important. But I think that people, like cancerous people, right? Like because it's so insidious, because you could have a really high performing company by sort of your financial metrics, but you could have like really gross people running it. And little by little, their cancer spreads to other people. And one day you wake up and you start to see your numbers starting to decline. Suddenly the entire company is inflicted, and it's almost impossible to fix without like mass firings, right? To get rid of all of that. So I think really like teaming that up. It's why like when we scan for people, we've really tried to perfect finding like always looking for people who have this like natural, you don't have to coax it out of them, ambition to be the very best at what they do, but that show in their conversation that they can like care about something other than themselves. So like they're not using the word I a lot. They're not pointing fingers at previous employers. You can kind of, there's some really
good teammates.
Good teammates. It's like good people, right? Like someone to have a beer with, right? Like it's like, I just think that stuff that matters, especially when you're in competition for really talented people and wanting to keep them. I think we're in a period for the foreseeable future where at least really talented people are going to have limitless options.
Amen.
In a way that you didn't before, because there will be like, I think we're probably on the same Julian, by kind of at the same conclusion on where work from home goes and whether or not there's going to be opportunities, right? So talented people will have opportunities to do whatever they want to do.
You've talked about that we may not know the results of the election until maybe even after election night. And that seems a little odd, knowing that back in the day, you could find out on election night. Why is that happening? And what's your view on election integrity? We have a candidate who talks a lot about election integrity. What's your view on that?
As a reporter running a media company who's looked at both ends of it, is there voter suppression and is there voter manipulation? There's very little evidence of it. Very little evidence of it. Even, I mean, the weakest part of Trump's argument is that if you go back and you look at the people who went and did the investigations and validated that the results were right, they were Republicans, a lot of them Trump supporters. And so just like practically speaking, you're saying it's probably right. And so I think our elections are run pretty well, like very well, probably compared to other countries. The reason it takes time is that we do have this screwy federal system of voting, which is the voting procedures and mechanics of voting are different in all 50 states. And some of them are quite antiquated, some of them are quite modernized. But once you start getting into antiquated systems in rural communities, it just takes time to count the votes, not through any malfeasance, just through like actual logistics. And when you have very narrow outcomes where 50 or 1,000 votes can make a difference, you actually have to wait for that process to play out. And that's why I don't like it when we're playing for the fire when we're screwing around, like saying like there's like this mass corruption in democracy or you can't trust anybody. Like, it's just not true. Like, it's not. Is there malfeasance? Is there corruption? Like, absolutely. Look at New York. Look at the mayor. There's.
Hey, we were founded in Chicago, Jim. So
Oh yeah, it happens everywhere.
Yeah, come on. Well, we have a lot to look at from now until election night. Susie, I want to thank you for a wonderful job having a conversation with Jim. Jim, always nice to see you, and we're glad you're back. I encourage everybody to pick up just the good stuff, no BS secrets to success, and you can learn and go deeper on what we've talked about today. So both of you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. It's awesome. Appreciate it. Take
Enjoyed
care.
it.